And we're live. Hi, everybody. Welcome to this week's version for our quilt solo. We're going to be doing the alternate block, so the chain block, and I'm hoping to touch in on the hourglass block. So I'm going to jump right ahead here and start because we've got a lot of things to go over. I did tell everybody that we are going to touch on and go over some cutting techniques today, so that's where we're going to start. So I have my fabric. Just going to adjust the. I've started and I've pressed really nice, and I want to fold it in half so I'm able to cut. If you can see the bottom of my fabric, it's not hanging straight. The only thing I know that's straight is my edges, so I want to line that up. Our cut edge is just that. It's a cut edge, so it could be crooked. So I'm not going to be using that in my aligning my fabric. So my fabric is not sewing. My fabric is not hanging straight. So I am going to just wiggle them back and forth. I have my finger in between so I can wiggle it back and forth, lining up my edges until it's hanging perfectly straight. Now I can lay that on my mat and I'm ready to cut. So we are going to cut some light fabrics. Again, because this is a cut edge, that is not necessarily straight. So there's a couple ways to do our straight edge. I don't want to flip my fabric because every time I flip my fabric, that edge could go crooked. So what I want to do is cut this edge straight. There's two different methods that we can do that with. Can you go run and get me another ruler? All right, got a square here. It'll work. So what I want to do is either turn my mat and cut my edge, or especially since we have problems with the camera for me to do that. Sorry about jiggling it. We all have some other rulers. If I tried to line this fabric up on a line on my ruler and then line my ruler up on lines on the mat and this on the mat, it's too many things for my brain to go wrong. I cannot just cut a 1/4 inch and have it really nice and straight. So I'm going to use the second ruler. Doesn't matter what ruler, whether you have a long one, a small one. I am just going to place this on my fold. Again, because that fold is what we now know is nice and straight because our top is aligned perfectly. So I have the line of a ruler on our fold. Now I'm going to take my long ruler and I'm going to butt it up against my square. Just going to double check this, make sure that it is straight, butt this up, making sure that this cut will cut both layers of our fabric. Going to move our square away. I'm going to cut with my cutter. So my baby finger, I like to be off my ruler for two reasons: holding my ruler straight, keeping my thumb away from the edge. Rotary cutter, doesn't matter whether it's this kind or the ergonomic one. Finger on the bumpy part. I want to hold it straight, perpendicular to the ruler. I don't want to put it at an angle. I'm going to cut only up as far as my fingers. I'm going to hold this cutter there because it's helping support my ruler from shifting. Cut. And cut. Now I have a perfect 90-degree, wonderful corner that I can cut my strips so I don't get boomerangs. Oh my goodness. We have a hello from Penrose, Colorado. Ooh, hello. That's exciting to know that there's people all over that are just watching little old us. Okay, so going to my paper, I need to cut 6 4.5-inch strips. Today, I'm only going to cut 3 because I want to show you how to speed cut squares. So I'm going to go to my ruler. I'm going to find the 4.5-inch mark. I'm going to put some line of my ruler on the edge of my fold and my 4.5-inch mark on the edge of my fabric. Remember that the line of my ruler should be on top of my fabric and not beside it. I don't want to see any fabric to the left of the line, but I definitely want to make sure that it's on top of my fabric. If this doesn't line up squarely, we have to retrim that side again. Again, same cutting. 1, 2, 3. So there's one strip. So I'm going to cut 3 today. And then I'll cut the other 3 later. Remember, we're doing these blocks now because they don't all have to be done for next week. We have until we put the quilt together. So what did we do? 7 blocks? So we have 5 more weeks to be able to complete blocks plus these. So don't feel stressed that you have to have all of these blocks done today or this week. That's why we just skipped ahead. There we go. And so I've got those 3. And while I'm at it, and while that my fabric is nicely laid out here, I'm going to cut myself just 2 2.5-inch strips. If you feel your ruler shift, stop right away and realign it. So there's 2. All righty. So I'm just going to put this to the side. We'll cut this later. So I'm going to go back to my 4.5-inch strips because it says to cut these into 48 4.5-inch squares. So we can take our strip and we can cut each individual strip. But here's one way to speed up your cutting. So if I took all 3 strips and tried to line them on top of the other, we're cutting 6 folds of fabric, 6 layers of fabric. Things are going to shift and I can't see whether my lines are aligned or not. So here's the one time when I do like the lines on my mat. I'm going to take my strip and I'm going to align it with a line of our mat so I know that it stays nice and straight. I'm going to go down. This time I'm going to go down 1.5 inches. I'm going to line up my second strip. And this strip I'm aligning up with that line. I can go down, if it was a 2.5-inch strip, I might go down 1. But because these are 4.5, I can go down another 2 inches. Making sure my edges are nice and straight. And aligning them up. So I've used the lines of my mat to line up my strips. Here's one thing that I wanted to tell you. That's why I also told you not to cut all your strips ahead of time. When we calculate our fabric, because fabric has a different width, sometimes it's from 40 to 42. So when I calculate how many strips we need, I calculate it at the 40-inch mark. If you have a 42-inch strip, you might be able to get 9 blocks instead of 8 out of your strip. So you may not need as many strips as what the pattern says. Clear? Clear as mud. Okay. Okay, so I'm going to take my ruler. And now I have different edges that I can align. So I can align my ruler up with the bottom. I can align it up with the top. Or there's my 4.5-inch line there. The edge of this strip, making sure that everything stays nice and straight. I'm going to just grab my other ruler and I am going to butt this up here. So I'm making sure that I'm cutting off all my selvage right now. Selvage shrinks at a different rate than regular fabric. So we don't want to distort any of our blocks after washing, that kind of stuff. So now all I have to do is cut 4.5 inches. Again, lining up some lines on the edge. My vertical 4.5-inch line is on the edge of my fabric. I can cut because it's a small cut. I don't have to move my hand. Now I have got 6 blocks cut just like that. So it speeds up our process a little bit faster. So that's all I need right now for that fabric. So I am just going to take my 2.5-inch strip. I'm just going to cut a couple blocks for that, or maybe I'll get Tiffany to do that later. We'll do that. What I want to talk about is our 7.5-inch for the dark. Here's a good time to take a step and see some adjustments. Maybe grab yourself a pen and write on your paper. Remember, I had decided I was going to use 2 darks. Well, the pattern was written with 1 dark fabric. So I had to make these adjustments. So if I am doing 2 darks, so dark 1 is my big center square. So I only need 2 4.5-inch strips of the dark 1. And I am going to need, I only need 1 2.5-inch strip of the dark 1, or 2 for the queen size. And I'm for dark 4.5-inch strips. Sorry. Okay, let's start over here. Dark 1, 4.5-inch strip. I'll need only 1 strip of dark 1, but I need the 2 other strips as dark 2. And those are the ones that we're going to be cutting. The 4-inch strip, the 4-inch squares are dark 1. The 7.5-inch square is dark 1. And the 2.5-inch squares are dark 2. This will become a little bit clearer as we go. So some of the 4.5-inch squares, we're going to be cutting into triangles for our sit-in units. Okay? Okay, so we cannot cut a 7.5-inch strip because I don't have a 7.5. So there's 2 ways that you can do this. We can either do like we did before, cut from this side though, let's do it. So I'm going to give myself a really nice straight edge here. Making sure I'm cutting both layers. I have to move it over a little bit. Cut. Cut. So now I have my nice straight edge. I'm going to take my square. So it doesn't matter whether we are using a Quilter Select or whether we're using the Tucker trimmer. I don't know which one shows better. Maybe the yellow one, I think. Okay. So I'm going to take my 1-1 because I want to make sure that I'm using the right measurement. That's my half. Let's do it this way. There we go. There's my 1 and my 1. So I'm taking my 7.5-inch line and I'm lining it on the edge of my fabric as if I was going to cut, making sure that that line on my ruler is on top of my fabric. I'm going to take my long ruler. I'm going to butt it up this way. I can see that it's nice and straight on my fold, butt it up next to my ruler. Gently move that one away. And now I'm going to cut. Oop, I moved. Give me a second. There we go. So now that we've got it cut, I can just turn it sideways and cut with my square. The other way of cutting a square is if we have our fabric folded once, we can fold it twice. I know these 2 edges are lined up absolutely perfectly, so I'm going to use this line on my selvage, and I'm going to fold to my selvage. You can see it's nice and flat. Everything's lying really flat. I can trim that edge. I can put my 7.5, and I can just cut in one fell swoop if you have the 12.5. Okay? Clear as mud. Okay. So Tiffany, if you can, I need to just cut a couple squares of this and a couple squares of that. And I am just going to scoot around to the sewing machine now, and we're going to start sewing. Is there any questions on cutting before we move?
No one has asked any questions.
Okay, good. I'm going to scoot around. Give us a second here. Okay. Are we back? I hope nobody got dizzy with that camera moving. Are we good to go?
What if this... I'm sorry, Martine, I don't understand your question.
What did she say? Okay. We'll visit that in a bit.
I think she might have pressed enter by accident and didn't ask the full question.
Oh, okay.
I'm not sure.
Okay.
What happened there?
All right, so let's make our 4 patches. Easy. I believe we've done those previously, but what I'm going to do is do it with really long strips this time. So I'm going to take my 2 strips and I'm going to place them right sides together, and I'm going to start feeding them into the sewing machine. You can lay them down and you can definitely pin them, especially if that makes you a little bit, give you a little bit more confidence. This is a really great place to use our seam-align glue that we can put those little dots and it'll hold our strips totally aligned up, because long strips have a tendency to wiggle. So this time I'm not going to glue them, but if you do have the seam-align glue, I suggest that's what you do. I'm going to show you if you don't. So my strips are aligned up absolutely perfect, and I'm going to start sewing. This is another thing because of our FOF machines that have this IDT. It's just really great. So it's as if I'm sewing with a walking foot. It's going to hold my fabric better. It's going to pull both layers. So I'm not going to get as much shifting. Alrighty. So I've got my needle in the down position and it's holding my strip where I want it to go. So now I'm going to move out about, 6-8 inches. And I'm going to make sure that this edge of my fabric is aligned totally in between my fingers. So I am only going to sew up to my thumb. I made sure that my fabric stayed together and didn't move. Now this was loose, so it might be crooked again. So again, I'm stopping with my needle in the down position. I'm going to make sure my edge of my strip is totally aligned, and off I go. When I get to this part where my right hand is in the way, I'm going to just let go with my right hand, but I'm holding firmly with my thumb so nothing moves. Again, if you have it pinned, make sure there's no shifting in between here. If there is, make sure that stays within your pins. If we have some fullness, we don't want to just take the pin and move it. We want everything to stay nice and flat. Again, I'm going to line everything up. I'm shifted here. Gonna move that back. So this full block is pretty straightforward.
If the block is done in just 2 colors, that's what Martine was asking, you're going to follow the original instructions. The dark is all written out and the light is all written out.
Exactly. And remember, this is only for the 9-patch block, the 9-patch chain block. We're going to go over the different cutting for the hourglass.
The strips she is sewing for the 4-patch are the 2.5-inch strips.
Correct. Alrighty. So now what we want to do is we want to press this. I am going to press my fabric towards the dark. And here's where, again, I want to make sure that my strip stays nice and straight. I have a line on my mat. You probably can't see it. I'm just going to cut my little beginner off. I am going to press that seam nice and firm. Set my seam. My iron's a little cool. I forgot to turn it on again. So I'm just moving this up with my fingers, making sure my edge stays nice and straight. And now I'm going to press. I have so many things floating in my head that I want to remember to tell you. I'm hoping I'm not going too fast. If I am, if you need me to repeat anything, please don't hesitate to ask. I know it's so much easier to understand what you're talking about at that stage. Alrighty, so just for today, I'm going to cut this strip in half, because I want to show you how to cut the 2.5-inch pieces. May I have a rotary cutter, please?
No, you're not allowed.
Thank you. We need a couple strips, so I wouldn't necessarily cut them in half, but you can if it's easier for you to work with. We can make them a little bit smaller. So now that we're doing we're doing a 4-patch, we want to cut these units into 2.5-inch segments. Move this up. So I can take my strip and I can cut it into the pieces and then just rotate them and put them all together. But here's a little faster tip. Can we move the camera just that way a little bit? Thank you. So I'm going to take my one strip. I'm going to lay it down. I'm going to take my second piece strip, lay it on top of my first strip with my darks on alternate sides. Now I am feeling as I go, my 2 edges are lining up and my seam allowance is nesting really nicely. I'm not getting a lump or a bump. So now when I cut, I'm going to take a line of my ruler and I'm going to put it on my seam allowance and I'm going to cut this selvage off. Again, I'm putting it on the seam allowance because that's what I want to stay straight in my block, not necessarily my edges. I want that seam to go nice and straight through the edge of my block. I'm just going to cheat. It's a little cut, so I'm going to cut backwards. And now all I have to do is cut my 2.5-inch units. Math-wise, 2.5 and 2.5 is 5. So if I still want to speed things up a little bit, I can take my 5-inch line, put it on the edge of my fabric. I'm going to cut one. I'm going to move my ruler over. Now I'm going to put my 2.5-inch line there. Cut 2. So now I have 2 units, 1 4-patch ready to sew, another 4-patch ready to sew. And then I need 4 for my block. So I'm just going to cut 2 more. Again, I can cut 2.5 and I can cut 2.5. That's not a problem. It's just a little bit speedier for me to do it this way. Don't get me wrong. I love every step of quilting, but sometimes it's kind of nice to speed a few things up. So I would just continue on and make all my 4 patches that I need for my block. Now that I have these units and they're already nested really well, all I have to do is pick up 2. Make sure my seam is butted, my edges are butted, and we get to sew 4 patches. If you want, because that's a nesting seam, you can put a pin.
What are the inches when you're cutting the 3 strips to make the 4-inch squares to save time?
4-inch, the 4.5-inch squares? The 4-inch squares, we only need 2 squares. For either quilt, we only need 2 4-inch squares. But the 4.5-inch strips, we need 6 for the, I believe it's 6 for the lap size. My paper's over there, Tiff. Oh, no, here it is. It's right here. And the 4.5-inch strips, so we need, if we're doing the one color, the dark, we only need 1 strip of the 4.5. And of the light, we need 6. I hope that answered that. And then you can see that it says that we are going to need, so of the dark number 1, the 4.5, we're going to need 6, or we are going to need 16 for the queen size. And the lights don't change. Actually, I didn't go over what I meant by the 4s. Can you give me the little square and the 4.5-inch strip there? Yeah. Yeah. Is that a 4.5-inch? Okay, give me my little square there for me. Okay, so on the paper, I forgot about this, how it's written here, excuse me, I said cut 4.5-inch strips, subcut into, oh, here, okay, subcut into the 36 4.5s, and then I need 2 4-inch squares of the dark number 1. So what I am going to do with my 4.5-inch strip, I am just going to take my ruler. I'm going to align my 4.5-inch up on this side, or sorry, my 4-inch on this side, my 4-inch on the other side. I have shifted a little bit. So I'm going to take, instead of cutting another whole 4-inch strip, I'm just going to take the remainder of this, and I am going to cut it into 2 4-inch blocks. And those will be on the corner units. If you want, while they're there nicely lined up, I can take my ruler and I can cut these once on a diagonal. I can put them there. These are my dark 4-inch ones, and I can also write on there that this is my corner. We're going to talk about why we do this in a few minutes. Did I answer her question, do you think?
Okay, can you explain the lap size versus queen size on your cutting instructions?
Sure.
I think that's where the confusion
Sure. Okay. So you can see right here where it says lap size, twin, and then queen is in brackets. So in my instructions, if you're cutting for a twin, it's
that's not a twin, is it? It's a lap.
it is a lap. I did put twin. Sorry. That word should be lap. So anyways, size is our first measurement, and the queen is in brackets. So as we go along the whole paper, that's always used in that direction. So you can see that this block that we're making, the alternate block, we're going to make 6 for our lap, 16 for our queen. That's pretty common in a lot of patterns, is it's written like that. Patterns, it'll have the different sizes, and then what else, what's changing from the actual size in brackets. So the dark fabric, again, dark number 1, we're going to use 1 strip. Queen sides, we're going to use the 2 strips. These are the 4.5s. The dark number 2, we're going to cut 2 for the lap, 3 for the strip.
Or if you're using 1 dark.
If you're using 1 dark, follow the pattern without any of the red adjustments. For the lap, 5 for the queen. So we're going to need 20 4.5-inch squares for the lap and 36 for the queen. Just going to finish sewing our 4 patches.
I'm going to leave it on these instructions just so they have a chance to write them down in case they haven't yet.
Oops, our furnace just picked on. Alrighty, I've got my four patches for our blocks sewn. I'm going to need one more 4-patch unit, Tiffany, for the side block. If you want to cut just one more unit after. I don't know if I'm going to sew all this together today so we can save some spot. But I do want to go again over our seam. So what I want to do is I want to spin these seams to reduce the bulk in the center of our strip. So I am going to take my strip that I just sewed, my unit. I'm going to unpick my previous seam down to the one that I just sewed, flip it over, do the same with this side. I'm going to grab my cutting mat. I'm sorry, my pressing mat. Now when I lay it wrong side down, I can see my seams, so I can press these so they spin in that circle. I'm going to have a teeny tiny little 4-patch there. I'm just going to hit it with my iron, but then I'm going to turn it over, making sure that my seams are open properly and I don't have any little foldy overs. So there we go. One. Tiffany is actually trying to sew a 4-patch standing up beside me. It's like quite hilarious. We'll see how good she's doing it. Again, I am unpicking this seam on both sides, leaving it underneath my previously sewn line so it doesn't come undone. 2. Again, I have one of those really firm pins that I'm just using to unsew because I really don't need the seam ripper. I don't want to cut my threads. I just want to unsew them. Open, press. Not too bad.
A little shakier than normal.
So you are in total going to make a whole mess of these. We need, I'm just seeing if I have it written down here. Did I write that? I didn't write that down, did I?
I guess you did not.
Oh, yes, I did. You need 34 4 patches or 100 if you're doing the queen size quilt. You can do them quite a bit of different ways, depending on what you like to do, whether you make them all at once or whether you make a few units and make a, 1 or 2 full blocks, if that's the time allows, at a time, or you can just make all your 4 patches and then you can assemble them on another day. There we go. So we've got that wonderful spinning seam. I don't have any bulk. My little 4 patch lays nice and flat. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to take my blocks that are all nicely, laid out, and I am going to take one of my dark number 1 4.5. I need 4 of my white 4.5, and I need 4 of my 4 patches. I'm going to use my other design board, my center block, my 4 patches, making sure that the darks all go in towards the center on the 4 corners, my lights in the spots that are remaining. And I'm going to sew those with my perfect 1/4 inch seam. At this point, remember, if you're still testing your seams and stuff, you're not confident with your 4.5, measure those 4 patches. They should measure 4.5 inches. Whoop, put it back in the right direction. All right, let's sew this baby together. Always make sure that my seams or my edges stay aligned really nicely.
And pin if you're not as confident as Cindy that they won't slip. Because I pin all the time and she almost never does.
When I'm matching a seam, I do. I find it really does do a better job. But when I'm just sewing 2 pieces together, yeah. I've trained my fingers really well over the couple years that I've been doing this. So, Remember, though, I never, ever, ever let the fabric slide through my fingers. And also when I'm not pinning, I always stop with the needle down and adjust everything to make sure it stays lined up, not only this edge, but the bottom edge as well.
that's a good question. How many of the 2.5-inch strips are you sewing to make the 4 patches? How many strips are you sewing into the strip set?
Okay, so I have here on the lights, we are going to be cutting, so we cut 7 in total of the 2.5-inch strips. We're only going to be using 5 for the 4 patches. The other 2, we're going to be cutting down into 2.5-inch squares that we will be using in these corner units. In the dark, we're cutting 5 2.5-inch strips. We're going to use them all. Making sure that these are still in the right order. I could press these seams now if I wanted to. I'm just going to live dangerously.
Yes, if you are using 2 dark fabrics, one is the center block and the other is the 4 patch.
Exactly.
The reason there is extra cutting sizes is for the triangle units that fit into the edges. That's why there's different cutting for the 2 darks.
We're going to go over that in a minute. Alrighty, I'm going to give these rows a little press. I'm just going to press towards our solid square. So pressing towards our light. And pressing this one towards our dark. Let's align this up, making sure that we're going to get our strips right because we don't want to twist one. We want to make sure that, again, our darks are going into the center. Now I'm going to, what did I do? Sorry, these are supposed to press to the light as well. I'm so used to pressing to the dark. I press to the dark side, but not this time. We want to press to the light. So now that it's pressed wrong, what I want to do before I try to press that seam in the proper direction is I want to press it flat again.
Yes, Martine, just 2 fabrics is fine. I'm using 2 fabrics in my block. I'll show that as soon as Cindy's done this. I'll go grab it.
Alrighty. We want to make sure that our seams butt. So they're all going towards the light this time. Pinning those 2 seams to make sure that they are nested really nicely. Going to align my edge up. We're going to sew this block. I felt that my seam was flipped. So again, I'm going to check and make sure. I'm going to sew right up to that pin. No pucker, just past my seam. I'm going to make sure that this is still aligned nicely like I said, or like I wanted it to be. My pin out. Again, aligning everything beautifully. And my second side.
We should also note that if in your quilt you are using a dark as a background in the rest of the piecing, instead of using a light as a background, that you might want to use a dark in the place of the light and a light in the place of the dark in these fashion blocks.
And I believe, I know there's a couple of them. I think Beth is, that she's using a dark with a K facet fabric. If you haven't gone back on the Facebook group and looked at some of the people's colors, some of them are just absolutely amazing. All of them are. I can't wait to see all these quilts when they're completed. And there we have it. I'm just going to press them towards the center because that's less seams in there. Subject to change depending on when I sew it next to one of the blocks that we have in the quilt. But for now, that's what I'm going to do. And there we have our alternate block. Now, Tiff's colors. So you can see that mine are very, very close to the same because this line has these beautiful prints with the same background. That's what I wanted to use. That's why I wanted to use two. Tiff, though, has decided that she loves this star fabric and she had enough. So she is just doing the two colors in hers. I love those little snowmen. Alrighty, Tiffany, can you get me a picture of our quilt in there? I believe this one's a little harder to see.
Oh, that's the queen size.
That's the queen size. Because we're going to start talking about these half blocks that we need to make. There, no, not that one. Yeah, perfect. Alrighty. Do you have the line drawing one as well? Maybe. So when we're doing a quilt, yes, actually, that might be a little bit easier to see. When we're doing a quilt with the blocks put on point, all it means is we're putting them crooked. We're putting them on point, as opposed to the regular way we put a quilt together. So that means we need to make what we call set-in triangles. Sometimes they're just a solid piece of fabric, but in this quilt, we want them to be pieced. That being said, let's lay one out. So we're going to lay out our triangle unit like this. And I'm going to take one of these. I should have another 4 patch. I am just going to wing it like this so you can see the 4 patch here. If I made my unit and just cut it off, 2 things would happen. We would not have a seam allowance, so we would lose the edge of our blocks. Nothing would be square. Also, if we cut them on a diagonal, all the edges of our quilt would be a bias edge. And we don't want that. It would be really difficult to put our borders on nice and straight, getting the quilt to lay flat, because if bias stretches, so we really don't want to do that. So we want to make sure that this unit here stays straight of grain. How do we do that? So these big blocks in our corner, these are our 7.5-inch squares. So what I'm going to do with that is take our 7.5-inch square. We'll take one without seam allowance. Here's a good example. I cut this a bit wrong. So I didn't cut all my selvage off. This one's not that bad because it's less than my 1/4 inch. I cut off the majority of my selvage, so I could still use this block. But just for today, I will. So what I'm going to do with my 7.5-inch block, remember, this is our straight of grain. This is our stable part of our block. So I am going to cut this twice diagonal. So I'm going to cut it in this direction. I'm also not picking up my blocks. I don't want to move everything. This is a great place to use a rotating mat.
Or tell your camera person.
Or tell my camera person to move a little bit, move my body. So now what I have is this large triangle right here with my straight of grain that will be on the edge. Clear? Again, so this will be in this direction on our quilt. So you will see as we're building our quilt, I will have our 4-patch. I will have our 2 side pieces with my pretty side up. Those are my 4.5-inch squares. This was my 7.5. My 7.5 will be fitting in here. It looks like it's not going to fit. Bear with me. You know how much I love fudge room. Some of this is going to be our fudge room. If I would have had to cut this to the exact size that it should be, it would have to be something in, I think, 3/8 or 5/8 or something. Don't want to go there. I want a little bit of fudge room. So it looks like it's not going to fit, but we're going to be fine. Now, these other blocks, we are going to need our 2.5-inch squares. And we are going to take a couple of our 4.5-inch. So this would be our dark number 2, the same one that we used for our 4 patches. We are going to do the exact same thing. And I am going to cut these diagonally into 4.
Your points don't line up.
Ooh. I need a few, so I'm just cutting 2 blocks at a time. If you're more comfortable with cutting 1 block at a time, remember it's your quilt. We're not supposed to rush with our quilting. Sometimes I get a little rushed with you guys because I don't want you to be here like all day. I think you'd be bored with me by then. So again, now remember that our unit, the outside edge is our straight of grain. So when we put those with our center block, our straight of grain will be on the outside, which is exactly what we want to do. So the first thing to do when we're making this block is we're going to make this little, for lack of a better word, half of a 4-patch. So I'm going to sew this together. So I've got them lined up. I would have a whole bunch of them lined up. We thought we could do this with the Deb Tucker technique sheet for birds in the air block. However, we could have done that, but it would have ended up as a biased edge on the edge of our block. So we didn't want to do that.
That was, you've got the wrong block name.
Birds of Paradise?
No, that was the last block. That's not this.
Not this one? But we thought we could do it, but it doesn't work. So what I want to do now is sew these 2 triangles to the squares. Shaded 4 patch that we thought we could use. Okay.
But then you end up with a bias touch.
We have this really nice squared edge here and square 90-degree edge. And that's the 2 sides that we're going to line up. And we're going to just let our little corner hang out where it wants to go.
Oh, we just needed a clarification. Holly asked, are you cutting the 4-inch or the 4.5-inch on diagonal? And that was the 4.5.
Yes, 4.5 twice on the diagonal.
And how many of those are you cutting?
We are cutting for the lap size 16 of them that are cut twice on the diagonal. That's our little notes down here.
I'm just going to zoom. Go ahead.
Okay, our lap, we are cutting, 6 were left whole, but we're cutting 16 on the diagonal twice. Queen size, we're cutting 20 twice on the diagonal. The little 4-inch square, we only cut once on the diagonal, and that will be the actual 4 corners of our quilt. We'll do that in a few minutes. Because I'm using a bias edge here, really great place to use my seam-align glue. I'm going to align that, hit that with the iron. I'm going to live dangerously. I can't find my ironing board. I think I buried it. And this is a little square, so I definitely want my leader. Thank you, Tiffany. I'm just going to hit that with the iron. Make sure that I am pressing or sewing on the proper seam. This one's really a really cool or a really easy block to get mixed up. Keep everything aligned in the right direction. When you pick it up and if you start flipping it, you don't know what side that you're supposed to be sewing. So stay a little bit organized. Make sure we know exactly what side we're sewing. One, we're going to glue this one. Thank you, Tiff. You know, Tiffany's so helpful and these things magically appear in front of the camera. Yeah, she said she won't do it on a regular basis, though. I have to do my own. I am going to press these towards the dark.
Okay, I gotta go. I'm busy here.
Let's lay them back down to make sure we know what side we're sewing. We want to make sure that our straight edge is lined up perfectly. So now I know I'm going to sew this side.
Just go over lining it up again. I'm not sure the camera was actually pointed at you last time.
Oh, just you mean the glue?
Yeah.
Okay. So I am going to put my little glue here. I have this funky little, what we call dog's ear hanging out the edge. I'm going to ignore this. So what I want to do is my right angle of my square. I align up both sides perfectly. I know my fabric is aligned up really nicely. Give that a press. I might as well do this one while I'm at it. Again. So we're not lining up any corners. We're ignoring what's happening over there. We want to make sure that our 90-degree corner is lined up really well. So now that I've used the seam-align glue and everything's pressed really well, I want to sew here. It's hard to sew with all these little points coming together. So I'm going to flip it over and I'm going to start sewing on my straight edge. And the same with this one. Whoops. You probably couldn't catch it, but I made sure that the edge of my foot just followed through from this piece of fabric right down to the bottom one and kept it nice and straight. Let's press this again towards our dark triangle. Now,
Beth said, so I have to reverse the darks and lights and keep track of everything. Any suggestion for having the chain look like random patterns?
If you really want it random, Beth, because they're just 2.5-inch squares, cut them all into 2.5-inch squares and sew your pieces together that way. Or take your strips, so smaller strips of your colors to your black, and sew them, cut them into 2.5-inch units, and then use those units to randomly make your 4 patches.
Yeah, personally, I would probably choose 5 different colors for the 4 patches. Then you have 5 strips to sew.
Or 8. It depends. She's doing queen size?
Oh, she's doing queen size.
Yeah,
yes.
so you have lots of different options that you can do. I
was thinking lap size used 5 strips.
Yeah.
So I would just go with the number of strips, choose that number of different fabrics.
If you're using fat quarter bundle, then again they're only 20 inches, so you're going to need 10 strips. So that will work really well as well. Alrighty, now here's our little half unit. You can see right here, if I put the 1/4 inch mark on my nose of my square, I have lots of seam allowance here. I don't want to trim that right now. Again, this might not be the method that you would like to do, but bear with me, and you can see at the end why I like doing it this way. But yeah, so I just want to make sure that I have more than a 1/4 inch, and I'm good to go. I'm going to take my pieces now, and I am going to sew together my 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 patch. Again, all I'm going to do is sew together this row, this row, this row, and sew them together in a row. So this is a row of 1. This one will be just the 2 pieces.
And again, matching your 90-degree.
Matching our 90-degree. Again, this is a bias. So if we have our glue, let's just give us a little glue. It'll hold everything together. Just scratching with my fingers gets things all aligned perfectly. If you don't have the glue, I suggest putting a couple pins. This bias has a tendency to catch on your feed dogs, so you don't want it to stretch. So I would definitely be pinning at that point. My next seam I will show you without the glue. So again, right sides over. I'm going to line up that 90-degree and make sure the whole 90-degree is aligned up. It'll keep things nice and straight. If I'm going to pin, I want to make sure that it's just lying nicely together. I'm not stretching anything. I don't want to stretch that bias triangle on the bottom. I'm going to pin my seam, and I am going to pin my bottom. My seam is bent over a little bit. There we go. Now, I'm starting to sew on that bias edge of the triangle. This is where things might start to get a little wonky. So I want to make sure that those fabrics stay aligned perfectly. So I am going to hold them with my left hand, sew with my right, and make sure all that bulk stays where it's supposed to be. I'll even take my purple thing and make sure that my fabrics aren't moving. I'm just going to look at these again, make sure that I have these in the right direction. I'm going to press my seam towards the light. I'm going to sew my last piece onto this first row. Straight edge and straight edge. I'm just going to zoom through this. Press towards the light. And here we go. So we want to make sure that we're going to line these up properly. So the seam between the two lights is the seam that I am going to match. I'm just going to cut my thread off here. If you're having an issue with the little point that's pointing out at this point, at this time, we can take our ruler, so long as we're not stretched.
Behind this one.
Thank you. I'm going to align my ruler up right along the edge of my fabric. I can cut that little nose off so it's extending my straight seam. I can do this one as well. I will need that later. Yeah, this one. So these two seams are the ones that match. Easy to get mixed up when you're sewing a quilt together in long rows. This is just one little block, so it's not too bad. So I always lie the two together to make sure that I have that nice long edge that doesn't go kind of wonky. And on this one, again, I'm not going to stretch it. I am just going to pat it so it's laying nice and flat, aligned up. I'm going to throw a pin in here on that seam, and now I'm going to start sewing. Off just a little bit. I'm just going to adjust this. We're going to press. So we're going to press our seams in that direction. Less seams. Ow, I just touched the iron. Ow. our next piece goes on here. Again, remembering these won't match absolutely perfect. We're not going to get that straight line because we have to, this has our trim space built in. This is our 90 degree. That's what we want to align up. So it's really nice. Again, if we have the seam glue, great place to use our seam align glue. I'm aligning up that full 90 degree there. Whoops. I'm aligning it up again. And let's sew that. So I just followed the edge of my foot. I didn't quite cut that corner off straight along the edge. So because this was aligned perfectly and held with my glue, I just made sure the edge of my foot followed this top unit. And let's press that. And there we have it. There is our nice unit. And of course you can't see because it's really hard to see, but our straight of grain on the edge is running along that edge. Parallel, thank you, to the edge. These are not our, because we've put this block on point, they are biased, but that's okay. It's the straight of the edge of our quilt that we really wanted to make sure that is straight of grain.
That's going to help our quilt measure square when we're at the end.
It's going to make your long armor very happy when they lays nice and flat. Corner unit. Corner unit is a little different.
Just before we start that, we did have a question. Last week you mentioned a third option for the alternate block. Will you be providing instructions for that one as well?
I wasn't going to. I can look at that. That was just the straight set with the little sashing that has the corners. I'll talk about that briefly when we are visiting our folded corner ruler in one of the blocks that's coming up. So I'll show you what I've done, and I will talk about that briefly then. Yeah. Okay. Where's my quilt pattern again? I lost it. There we go.
Or if we have a lot of interest in it, maybe we'll go over that again at the very end. We could add in the week 13 or 14, whatever that would be.
Yes. Okay. So these are this is the one we cut in 4. So we cut it in 4 because we wanted to make sure that our straight of grain was on the outside, on the long side of our triangle. When you look at our corner unit, we need the straight of grain along the 90 degree of our triangle. So that is why we took a 4-inch square. We cut it once diagonally, so our straight of grain stays nice on the outside of our quilt. So we are going to be making 4 of the corner units. Again, I don't have any 4.5-inch units here.
You didn't take your 4.5s and trim them to make the...
I did do a couple. I only just did a couple.
Oh, yes.
I just did a couple.
Those are the same as the one you did in that one.
Yeah. Alrighty. So, can Tiffany grab me a 4.5-inch white square, please, over there? Do I have any 4.5-inch white squares?
I think you might have used them all.
I might have. I must have a 4.5-inch strip over there I haven't cut.
Yep, looks like you do.
Awesome. I am just going to, and I don't have another 4.5 of the little birds in the air blocks. I forgot about those on our corner unit. But Tiffany's just getting us a 4.5-inch white square because I want to show you how to align the corner up with the edge of our quilt. I'm sorry, the edge of our block. Thank you. So here's our 4.5-inch block in our corner unit, and we will have our corner unit triangle. It's going to hang out. That's right. It's going to be, again, a little bit oversized. We love that. Can you just unpick those and then I'll use those?
I have to?
Yeah. So what we want to do is align this triangle to the center of our square. Easy thing to do, easiest way to do it. Fold our block in half, give it a little finger press right in the edge. I'm going to do that again here. Remember, this is a bias, so we don't want to stretch it, but I'm just going to give it a little finger press so I can see where the mark is. So I am going to align those two marks up, either again pin or use our seam align glue. I am going to align that edge up, taking that center mark that we pressed in, giving it a press. We are good to go. Again, if it's crooked, easy to do. We can just unpeel this and it comes right apart and there's no gluey residue. Again, starting with a corner. If you're having issues with your machine, pulling your corner into your sewing machine, remember, probably time to change your needle. I am just going to line my foot up on the edge of my dark fabric. I'm not anywhere near the white yet, but I'll get there. And there you have it. I can press towards the dark. Again, setting my seam. We're good to go. Some sewing machines have these marks on the sewing machine. Can you zoom in here, Tiff? Some of our tables have them, and you can see the marks here. It starts at a 0 and it goes in both directions. What that is to find our center. So I can hold the block here and you can see that I'm at just a smidgen more than the 5.5 centimeters. But there's inches down here, so I'm at the 2.25 inch. I can put my block on top. And it will measure exactly from 7 to 7, and we're good to go to sew. But that's why it starts in a 0 and goes out. This block's a little large. It doesn't fit quite my sewing machine. I know it does on my table at home. So instead of pressing that center mark, all I have to do is use the lines, the markings on my sewing machine to align my edge. Ready to go. Just that's why they're there. Just because inquiring minds want to know. So Tiffany just unsewed this just so we can slip them in here so you know how to sew the block. So I am going to place 1 unit here and 1 unit here. At this point,
no.
Sorry. There we go.
Sin.
I'm getting there. I'm getting there.
There you go.
There you go. Again, these lines will not, these edges will not align up because there's a built-in fudge room, and it's not quite the same amount of fudge room as before, but it's the 90 degree of our white squares that we want to align with the 90 degree of our other white square, our large white square.
Since I don't want to unpick this again, I'm gonna get you to do that side.
That side?
Because that should cover that. But I think you need the point on the end.
So I am first going to align this edge again using my pins, using my glue, making sure again we've got bias edges on our brown. I am going to pin this.
Do you need more room?
A little bit, thank you. I have to put this down again. And I didn't hold my threads and it pulled up. Oh, good. We've got lots of time yet. Any other questions, Tiff?
No one has asked any so far.
All righty. Where is, there it is. Now, because we didn't have any other 4 patches, Tiff unpicked them from the last block, the side block that we did. So that's why my little point is already cut off at a little bit of a funny angle, but that's okay. Again, this point here, if it makes your life a little bit easier, just take your rotary cutter, aligning the edge of our ruler with the edge of our straight edge of our block. We're going to cut off that little point. We want to align our white block. Again, this is biased down here. I want to make sure that I'm going to pin it or glue it or something. Cut our little feeder off there. So there we have it. So it doesn't matter what size of quilt you have, it's going to have 4 corners. So you need to make 4 corners. Again, the corner block is cut once on the diagonal. And then the edge blocks on our side units are cut twice on the diagonal. So we need to make 10 side blocks for the lap quilt, 16 for the queen size, and our 4 corners. So you've got your work cut out for you, but don't forget that you've got a few weeks to do this, like 5, 6 weeks. We'll be doing this on the 6th week. So that's pretty cool. So we do have some time to talk about our hourglass units.
Sorry, this is an extra long video today.
If you're doing the hourglass setting, you can see the hourglass unit that is right there. I don't think you have to watch me make them because I believe we did that in month, correct me if I'm wrong, I think it was month 2 we did the hourglass unit. We're going to do exactly the same thing, except we are going to be using the 13.5-inch squares to make 12-inch finished, 12.5 cut hourglass units. What I do want to spend the time on is our side triangles. Okay. So again, it looks like we should be able to just take a half square triangle and cut it in half. So if this was our half square triangle and we lost the rotary cutter, there it is, I got it. And we cut it in half. This is the unit that we need. That being said, we now have a bias edge here, and we don't want to do that. We want to make sure that that stays nice and straight. So what we are going to do is we are going to take our 2 9.5-inch blocks, and we are going to cut. My ruler's not big enough for this. Thank you. We are going to cut them once.
Oh, you know what? How about I move out of your way a little?
Thank you. We are going to cut those on the diagonal once. So there's my light, there's my dark, or in this case, vice versa. I think it really doesn't matter. So that is our diagonal edge. So we are going to take this is our straight. Our straight, they're going to go like that. Again, this is our diagonal. Here, our long side of our triangle. So we want to keep that nice square edge, nice square edge. We're going to sew those together. We are going to press towards our dark. Now, this outside flat edge is our straight of grain. So it's going to keep our quilt laying nice and flat. Our block will be in this section here. Again, this is a bias. So we are going to have to be careful when we're sewing our blocks together. We'll talk about more of that when we're actually sewing our blocks together. Because these are biases, this is another really great place to use lots of spray starch on our alternate square blocks, on our hourglass blocks. It's going to keep that bias edge from stretching when we sew it towards our blocks. The corner unit, yes, it's a little bit smaller than this, but for lack of, or for just instead of putting another measurement on it, because we're going to be trimming up anyways, we're going to take one of our squares. We're going to cut it again diagonally, and that's also going to be our corner blocks. So the way the quilt goes together is we'll have 2 white corners. We'll have 2 dark corners. We're going to be using the same triangles for the sides and for the corner. Super simple.
Any questions?
Yeah. So it's only one. Oh, that's 2:30. That's what that is.
2:30.
I keep looking at my clock and I'm going, oh, it's 1:30. We have lots of time.
No.
Somebody has to get up on a ladder and change our clock. So it's a lot to go over today. Don't forget, you know where I am, that you can definitely drop by, or you can give me a call. We can, talk you through on the phone, or drop in if you need a little bit more instruction. I'm here every day. I hope it's clear. Again, a lot of information because of bias and edges, setting things on point, but that is just the reason why we do what we do. Anything else?
I don't see any other questions.
Awesome. Wonderful. So thanks for joining me today. Next week, we're going to go back to, I believe it's block 8. I'll have to double check that to make sure, but I think it's block 8. And I don't even remember which block that is, but I think we're touching on a new technique this next week. So in the meantime, happy sewing. Bye now.